All right, so welcome to today's session about our competitors. So this is pretty much our most important session. And the reason why is because when we go on all these calls, um, basically the traditional thing that happens is it's like ring, ring. Hey, my name is Chris. I'm here at GitLab. And one of the first things that a lot of these people want to know is how we compare to Jenkins and GitHub and some of the other tools that are out there. So this is extremely, extremely common. Pretty much sometimes when you sell a technology product, it's like in a net new space where they just want to know about it. The calls that we're on, they're competitive situations like 85% of the time. So in the next 45 minutes, I want to basically set and talk about having a goal of how to win more competitive situations. And the specific things that I want to talk about is better understanding of why we win and why we lose. So one of the things that we did is that we actually did some competitive intelligence. We went into Salesforce and looked at our win-loss record against some of these competitors. And then we found out that if we lead with X, Y, and Z, then we have a higher conversion rate. So I'm happy to report some of these findings here today in today's session. Also want to talk about our competitors, how they're pitching against us. I did some undercover snooping for you. I interviewed one of the past product managers at one of our competitors, and then also some of the people that used to sell against us. Talked about how they thought about us, what they're saying, and lastly, talking about our differentiators. So jumping right in, GitLab is a very, very broad product. So Andrew, you remember Ansible Tower, but if you almost think about like Ansible Tower plus OpenShift plus Satellite all combined and mismatched into one gigantic product, then that's what we're talking about here. So GitLab's whole product vision statement is to be one tool to replace many, many tools. And because of that, we literally can replace 10 to 20 tools in many of our customer environments. That being said, one of the things that we sort of think about when we first come here is, all right, great. Well, I have to go learn 55 competitors now, but it's really not that complicated. As a matter of fact, it's really just 4 competitors that we hear over and over again, probably in like 80% of our calls. And so these 4 competitors, you can pretty much guess them. One of them is GitHub. A little story about GitHub is that in one of our main meetings where Sid and a lot of our C-level came to basically talk about the strategic risks for our business, they basically listed GitHub as one of these major threats. So this is something that is real. Number 2 is another company, our tool that is owned by Microsoft, Azure DevOps. Then Jenkins, something that you may or may not have heard before, and then lastly, the Atlassian suite. So we're specifically going to talk about Jira here, but we will talk about some of the other Atlassian tools. So how many of these have y'all sold against in prior roles?
Sold against Azure DevOps with OpenShift. I've never sold against GitHub, and we were actually a Cloudbees Jenkins partner at the last company, so didn't sell against them, sold with them, with the exception of one customer that we were moving towards silver from the standard support.
Got it. Yeah. All right, so moving on, when we first come here, we get a very GitLab centric view of things. Things are very pro GitLab. We're looking at our marketing materials, some of our advertisements, really easy to get wrapped up in it, but ultimately, like what actually is happening in our market right now. It's really important to have an objective view of who the incumbents and who like the challengers are. So from a product perspective, the good news is that we have the best product. So we currently operate in 10 product segments, and our competitors are operating in smaller chunk of these segments. And so the Salesforce record shows that in general, when we compete against these tools and win, part of the most major reason is because of product. We have a deeper, vaster, better product than these competitors right now. But let's actually take at some more holistic metrics into the market themselves. So one of the things that we can take a look at is the number of industry job postings for GitHub versus GitLab. And this is a metric on where the market is going. So if companies are hiring for more people who need Jenkins, then that just goes to show their market share right now. So what I did is I went on Career Builder and I searched for us and our competitors. And as you can see right now, Jira and Jenkins are number one and number two. Azure DevOps and GitHub are basically 2 and 3, and GitLab is currently in number 5. Other things that we can take a look at is the size of your Reddit community. Reddit communities matter a lot because Reddit is basically the watering hole of where technical individual contributors go to talk about technology. So this is basically what they are going on their own time to go talk about technology. It goes to show what they care about, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in. And so this is the size of our Reddit communities. Over here, GitHub is by and far in number 1. GitLab is in number 2. And then 3 through 5 is basically Azure DevOps through Jira. So quick question, why do you think there's such a big delta between Reddit and the developer communities and the job postings? Like, tell me some of the reasons why there would be such a huge delta.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So this is just a pure guess, honestly, because I don't know anything about any of these companies outside of GitHub and GitLab. But I would imagine that the two companies that, can you go back to that other chart that you were showing? So Jenkins and Jira, are those like older companies that have been around for a longer time?
That is very, very, very insightful. They're much older than all the other tools.
So when that happens, when a company is really old, they're not as tech savvy as the new startups that come up. So the fact that like GitHub and GitLab are newer companies, that also means that they're more technologically advanced than some of these older companies that have been around for a long time. Because with older companies, they don't keep up with as much of the technology that the new ones do. Like their business base is based off of something from the past. And so it's a lot harder to adopt something than it is to just start off techie. So I think with with GitHub and GitLab, they probably have a larger social media presence and a larger just presence online because they're new and they got that whole startup frenzy that was around them. And they grew a bigger online presence, although Jenkins and Jira might share more of the market. Does that make sense? That's just my analysis. I don't know if that's the case or not.
There's definitely aspects of that. That's really, really insightful. One thing that I would say is that the good news is that these job postings, they're being created by directors, senior directors, VPs, maybe not VP, but like leadership, right? Versus, so this goes to show what management wants. This goes to show what the individual contributors want. And so there's a huge delta here. And the good news is that when the individual contributors and the practitioners are actually vouching for you and want to use your stuff, then eventually it's going to percolate up in the leadership a lot of the time. So last thing that we're going to talk about is customer ratings. There's all sorts of different sites that rate software solutions. You have G2 Trust Radius. And what we see over here is that GitHub is actually number 1. I use GitHub for 7 years, still use it today for certain things. But GitHub's in number 1. GitLab and Azure DevOps are basically tied for number 2, and Jenkins and Jira are number 3. But the other thing that I want to point out is that there aren't really big differences between these tools, right? So the highest that we have is like a 4.4 out of 5. Lowest that we really have is like a 4.1 out of 5. So it's not some sort of astronomical difference. So sort of summarizing everything, GitLab is in a really great position in the sense that we are an up and coming solution and we're actually taking market share from many of these other tools. So a lot of times when we compete against Jenkins and the Atlassian suite, this is where we're having a lot of success. I used to talk with, I was chatting with one of the people who used to work at Jenkins Cloudbees, and I asked him about his experience selling against GitLab. What he told me was that when GitLab got into his account, pretty much he would move on because he knew that he'd probably lose the competitive situation. So he would spend his time on another account. And so all that is to say is that in summary, we are an up and coming solution. We are winning because of product primarily. And really what we're trying to do is that we want these metrics to continue increasing so that we are one of the dominant players in all of these categories in the next 3 years. So that's our company trajectory. So talking about GitHub first, this is the most major competitor that we have. And just simply put, it's the biggest threat to GitLab. So some metrics about this. They have a huge user base that really loves the product. And so there's this thing called an Alexa rank. Have you guys heard of Alexa rank before?
No.
So it's your ranking in terms of web traffic on the entire global internet. So like Facebook, YouTube are like number 1, number 2, Google is like number 3, whatever. And out of their ranking in the entire global internet, they are number 86 when I checked. And with respect, GitLab is number 2,614. Part of the challenge is that the vast majority of open source communities live on GitHub. And a little bit about its story is that it was a private company for a really long time. And eventually Microsoft paid top dollar for them. So that's how they came into the Microsoft family of tools. And so just talking a little bit about GitHub and the challenge that it presents, they're incredibly visible like product. I've probably looked at maybe like 50, 70 resumes in my life when I was selecting people to interview back when I was in engineering. And I'd say over 75% of these resumes up on top, they would actually link, to their GitHub username. And that was pretty much their profile on the internet. Other things is that they're extremely, extremely visible. So obviously, like in the digital marketplace today, if you have other sites that are linking to you, talking about you, using your logo, it just increases your mind share on the internet. And the problem is that GitHub is extraordinarily visible on the internet because of their popularity, primarily with open source. And so this website that I'm actually showing right now is pretty much the most popular website for one of the most popular programming languages. Over here in the left-hand panel, they're just linking to GitHub. And so that's just increasing their visibility in terms of the internet. Last thing is that they are problematic for enterprise. So this has gotten a lot better. Our win-loss record against GitHub right now is around 50% in competitive situations. But you should know that there are specific problems that are specific to enterprise. One is that some enterprises just want to work with large vendors, right? And if you can just imagine it, a lot of the work that is done in sales is just getting meetings, right? So how can we get the meeting? How can we build the relationship? And all of that takes a lot of time, money, energy. And the problem for us is the fact that Microsoft is very, very good at sales, and they're already selling 30, 50, $100 million worth of stuff to the enterprise. So they're buying Microsoft Office, they're getting Microsoft Azure. So a lot of these enterprise companies, their VPs and C-level, they pretty much already have like a quarterly meeting with the Microsoft sales rep. And so just as we have to fight to get a lot of these meetings, they already pretty much have their foot in the door. And one of the things that they've been seeing, what we've been seeing in the field in the last like really year to year and a half, is Microsoft knows that we're coming after them, and they're doing a very clever pricing scheme to lock us out of some of these accounts. And so the idea is, let's just say that a large enterprise business, I'm just going to reference Bank of America right now. They have a $100 million renewal coming up. Bank of America is trying to get a discount. And then so what Microsoft says is, I don't want to give you a discount, but what I will do is I'll throw in GitHub for free for your entire engineering department. The cash value of that is $15 million. How about that, right? And so a lot of times the customer will say yes to that, and then all of a sudden, because they theoretically get GitHub for free, then they don't really have a reason to get GitHub and GitLab. And then so it's really hard for us to break into some of those accounts once they have signed these enterprise agreements. In my experience, around 20% of US enterprise companies have an EA with Microsoft. So it's really important once you start prospecting to know which of these businesses have EAs with Microsoft and which ones don't, so that you can allocate your time effectively. Binta, your cat seems to be enjoying things so far, but can I help clarify anything? Or this is pretty clear so far?
No, it's pretty clear so far. It's interesting to hear that I've been researching GitHub too, just for the purpose of information. And yeah, I definitely see that they're a pretty big competitor. But I think GitLab is moving pretty fast though. That's the thing that makes me feel like maybe within the next 3 to 5 years, it'll be a lot closer. The gap will be closed by then. Yeah, he's a fool himself. He's so nosy.
That's awesome.
Chris, in your experience, when Microsoft is baking in GitHub to these long-term agreements, is there some sort of catch? Because I know VMware is doing the same thing with Tanzu right now, where it's like, hey, Kubernetes is basically free for the XYZ amount of time, and then they tie it back in as a line item a couple years down the road. Is that happening here as well? Is there some sort of like pitfall or trap with Microsoft extending GitHub to the customer these ways?
I would say that's very, very insightful. I think that in my experience in sales, that VMware is pretty much the most clever about these like really interesting renewals, and all of a sudden you have like a big bill at the end and stuff like that. I haven't seen Microsoft do as much of like these really interesting clauses and stuff like that, but just to sort of summarize, EAs are part of their business strategy. They are pretty effective at locking a set of accounts when they do this. But it's all not negative stuff. Some companies don't want to work with Microsoft because they're a competitor to Microsoft, right? And then so it works for them, but some vendors, like, it works against them as well. So yeah, there definitely is an element of that. It's not as like deep as what VMware does.
Okay.
I've also seen that some people are mad about Microsoft acquiring GitHub. Like I've read some posts and boards and things where people are like, everything Microsoft touches goes to hell. So it's like a lot of people aren't excited about that acquisition there.
There's some old bad blood in Microsoft versus the open source community. For years and years and years, they were so anti-open source, and then suddenly they pump billions of dollars into it. So it's kind of an about face for them.
They rebranded.
Yeah.
They just tried to rebrand by buying GitHub. It's part of why they did it.
Gotcha.
All right. Thanks for all those thoughts. Diving a little bit into what it does, traditionally, it really did two things. It was your SCM and it had issues. And so this is GitHub. I'm just going to type in one of the projects that I used to work on. Here's all your source code. Type in, see a file, right? And then you have issues or tickets. So here's all the things that people are requesting new additional stuff for this this project. And the story a little bit about this is that GitLab they were very, very successful at SCM and issues. They were happy with it. And then GitLab came onto the scene. GitLab had a much more ambitious vision for their product. They wanted to be the single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle. And no one had really done this before, right? And so GitLab started adding on more and more and more cool stuff for security, stuff for software release, stuff for package management. And what GitHub started realizing is, hey, we're actually losing market share to GitLab. And so around 3 to 4 years ago, they started really kicking off their roadmap and making it more ambitious. And now at this point, they compete with us in basically the majority of our product categories. So that being said, they're still behind us in terms of product. This is Chris Wang's rough estimate, but it's about, I'd say, a year to a year and a half in terms of just like R&D. And they're actively copying our roadmap. So they copy our roadmap, they copy our marketing assets, they copy a lot of our sales messaging. Literally, like on their website, you can see things that are almost like identical to things that are on our website. And so we are the innovator. They're trying to catch up. And that's where we are from a product perspective. Our strategy is, while we do have this product advantage, to grab as many accounts as possible. That's basically the basic strategy of what we're trying to do right now. So diving a little bit more into the new functionality, it's not as mature as what we have. They're really trying to add a lot of things quickly. So automation with continuous integration, security, packaging, deployment, release. And about a couple, I'd say really about 2 years ago, they did something that was very, very, very smart from a business point of view. They basically realized, we have the entire open source community on our platform. We're behind GitLab. So why don't we make GitHub extensible so that the open source community can go extend our platform for us, right? And so what they did is they created this thing called the GitHub Marketplace. What you can do in the GitHub Marketplace is you can get all sorts of extensions for GitHub now. And so specific things from Red Hat's on here, HashiCorp's on here, but they basically leverage their community to make their product better. And so one of the things that you can see over here is that there's over 8,000 extensions for GitHub on the Actions platform. And so all that is to say, this is a lot of things. This is basically what they're trying to do. When you build a GitHub automation pipeline, then what you are doing is that you are selecting from these actions in the marketplace to add into your pipeline. So just like a quick visual of how this works. At a high level, this is what our product does. We have functionality around maybe 55, 60 different things. With GitHub and all of the extensions that you can get, they actually do more than us from a product perspective now, because they have created this ecosystem. This is now GitLab. So in GitLab, you have these automation pipelines. All of this cool stuff is happening, ultimately making our customers more efficient, saving them time. This is just an example of automation in terms of software development. So what GitHub has done is, if you want to build their version of an automation pipeline, go into the marketplace and go select actions. Each one of these actions is like one of these automated things in the actions pipeline itself. Just sort of summarizing, 2 years ago, they leveraged the open source community to basically extend their platform for them. This has become popular. Now you can get actions off of the marketplace, and this is how you create an automation pipeline in GitHub, which is similar to what we are doing here in GitLab. So they're trying to basically copy us. And that's kind of a scary thing, but let me just sort of level set with y'all. One, their stuff isn't as good as ours for a number of reasons. Technical, also business. And one example of a business problem with these actions is the fact that you have a GitHub bill. If you want to get these actions, now you got a Red Hat bill. Now you got a Paraxosoft bill, right? And all this stuff adds up. There's problems with them from a technical perspective, but long story short, some of these actions are free. Some of them cost money. And for a variety of reasons, if you take TT110, then we'll go into them. But for a variety of reasons, actions aren't widely adopted simply because they don't fit the customer needs right now. And Microsoft is trying to work really hard in getting this to become a more robust system. Okay, so trying to go through some of these things real quick. I'm going to stop to have questions later. But how do we win? This is what our Salesforce data shows. So number one is features. The fact of the matter is, yes, you can go on the marketplace, extend GitHub, but out of the box, GitLab does way more than GitHub. No one argues about this. And a matter of fact, this messaging is resonating with a lot of the individual contributors. That's the reason why. Yeah, okay. Other reasons why, in terms of features, is specifically our security offering. So we have much better security scanning capabilities than GitHub, and this is one of the largest differentiators that we have with them right now. So if you get into a competitive situation, one of the things that you can ask is, what are you doing today for security scanning within development or DevSecOps? And then a lot of times people will say nothing, and then that's a good way to basically pivot between us and GitHub. Another example of how we win from a technical perspective is self-hosted deployments. This is when you want your SCM tool to, you can't have the SaaS offering. You need it to basically be on-prem somewhere. And then so in the self-hosted market, you can see that GitLab has an 80% market share and GitHub has a 3% market share. And so this graph is a little bit old, but that being said, we are way better for certain customer scenarios. For one, if you're just some sort of government contractor or some sort of super security conscious business that requires to have self-hosted source control management, then we're a really great solution, and we have huge product differentiators versus GitHub right now. Other reasons why we win: problems with GitHub Actions and the fact that we're open source. So this resonates with a lot of people. When you partner with us, you're not just partnering with an enterprise solution, you're partnering with a movement, something that you can be a part of. You can directly influence our roadmap by creating issues within GitLab itself. We're very transparent, and you can basically be a part of this as well. Very similar to the Red Hat messaging, in all honesty. All right, cool. Can I help clarify anything about GitHub? What do you think?
Do we still have an on-prem plan?
Yeah. So
Okay.
roughly right now, half of our sales is coming from on-prem.
Okay.
What is that? What is on-prem?
On-prem.
So
Go ahead, Andrew. Go for it, dude.
So if you're sitting at your computer right now and you were to install an application on your computer, that would be on premises, right? So that application lives on your physical machine, versus something like if you were to go on a Spotify, you're technically, the song that you're accessing doesn't live on your computer. It's being streamed to you from some sort of server somewhere else. So that's a software as a service. So Salesforce is something that we use, that's software as a service. So GitLab on-prem, they would install it and store their repositories and all their stuff on their computers, versus GitLab storing it and them accessing it via some sort of web face.
Gotcha. That's what the self-hosting means, right?
Yeah.
Just another word for self-hosting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just thought that was something that was being phased out. Or am I mistaken?
We're trying to keep both on-prem and SaaS.
I hear that SaaS part is, I mean, the self-hosted part is really good for like the people that are in the military and stuff, because it's more secure and some people want to have it on their own systems because they don't trust having it on a cloud.
That's exactly correct. They have some security requirement, which basically says you can't use a SaaS offering. It has to be on your own stuff. So in an instance like that, we win a huge chunk of the time. All right, so once again, primary differentiator is better product, and foremost in that, if you have a self-hosted, customer needs self-hosted, or security scanning. Those are number one and number two. All right, so Azure DevOps is number two tool by Microsoft. A little bit story behind this is that Microsoft actually created Azure DevOps first, and very rarely does a company make their own solution and then spend lots of R&D and investment on it and then decide to buy some other solution, because they're basically duplicate solutions, right? But this is exactly what Microsoft did. So it was with GitHub when they bought GitHub. Azure DevOps is the original solution created in 2015. And that being said, one of the things to really understand about this is that Microsoft strategically is betting on GitHub. How we know this is the fact that they're moving engineering staff from Azure DevOps to GitHub. You can trace this on LinkedIn and stuff like that. We can also see from the fact that Microsoft is copying functionality and roadmap from Azure DevOps into GitHub. Obviously, that being said, Microsoft's a smart business. They're not going to say we're discontinuing Azure DevOps because they want the renewal dollars, right? But the fact of the matter is the roadmap for GitHub is where you can see the investment at. This is what they're doubling down on right now. So from a technical perspective, very, very, very similar to GitLab. Almost, they basically compete with us in a huge number of our product categories. Their sales marketing motions are almost identical to us. They describe themselves as a full software development solution, just like we do. They have a great self-hosted and SaaS solution. Some of their advantages over us is that they're better suited if a customer is really heavily involved in Microsoft. So they have a lot of the Microsoft tooling, VS Code, stuff like that. Then they have some advantages over us there. And how they basically ultimately leverage all of this stuff is a lot of the same stuff that we talked about with Microsoft. So enterprise agreements, using their existing sales relationships and so on and so forth. But I'm actually just going to skip through some of this stuff because it's more important to focus on GitHub right now. From a product perspective, they're very mature. This is an example from their website, but they have all sorts of these documents that say, we're more mature. If you get Azure, then you have yes, yes, yes. If you get GitLab, no, 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 right? So very similar to what we're doing, except in reverse. So obviously, each of these tools has their own messaging. How we ultimately win, once again, doubling down from the fact that we're a more complete software engineering solution, despite whatever their messaging is. We can more authentically say that we have a more complete solution. And this is especially true for engineering shops that aren't heavily involved in the Microsoft ecosystem. So things like if they're working a lot in containers, Kubernetes, this is great for GitLab. We're better than them if they're heavily involved in containers. Another thing is that our security features for DevSecOps is way better. So it's our primary differentiator with both GitHub and Azure DevOps right now is our security features. And this is something that our product and engineering teams are doubling down on. If you look at our product investment for 2021, this is where we're putting a huge number of our engineering hours so that we can maintain this advantage. Other things is that we're open source and better roadmap, right? So people can go out, see the Azure DevOps roadmap, compare it to us. It's pretty clear that they're going to start investing more into GitHub, and this is something that becomes transparent just by looking at the roadmaps. All right, so going pretty quickly straight into Jenkins. Jenkins is where you are going to have a lot of your success. And so a little bit about the story of Jenkins. Jenkins is the original DevOps solution. So these other tools were founded in 2013, 2015, so on and so forth. But Jenkins was created in 2005. And so what it did was, because it was the original solution, it basically gobbled up the entire market. It's an open source solution, and so that means it's free. And so basically what we're talking about is the fact that an estimated 68% of the market has Jenkins somewhere in their environment. And so this could be that some VP likes Jenkins and has decided to use it as a core essential tool for their entire engineering department. This could also be that some random person for their team lead, basically created a Jenkins server because it's open source and he basically had some spare time. There is an enterprise version of Jenkins. This is called Cloudbees. And the main thing to know about Cloudbees is that they aren't a super large threat. You may run into Cloudbees maybe once or twice per year, but it's not super important to focus on them. the main thing to note is that they're the original solution. They have a huge presence in many of our accounts. And in all honesty, they're kind of a legacy solution, right? So written in 2005, how often do people in technology use a tool that's 16 years old now, right? I'm going to skip the Cloudbees slide, but how we win is the fact that I actually was a Jenkins administrator for about 3 years. And so I can speak to this with just telling some stories. But the way to sort of think about Jenkins is that Jenkins is like that unreliable car that breaks down when you really, really, really need to get to that interview, or you're going to go on a first date or something. You really need to be there at this pivotal point in time. And then Jenkins just breaks down on you. So what I mean by this is that it's unreliable. It's difficult to maintain. A lot of businesses, they will hire someone, pay them $120,000 per year just to maintain Jenkins. If you get something like GitLab, you generally don't have someone who's administering it full time. And part of the problem is the fact that you need these things called plugins or extensions to really leverage Jenkins. And so most organizations, they have between 550 and 200 of these extensions. And the big problem with having these extensions is that now Jenkins is this open source project. If you have 75 of these extensions, now there are 76 different entities that have written part of your code. So what ends up happening is if you upgrade one part, then it was never designed and tested to basically verify that it would not break the remaining 75 parts in your Jenkins environment. And so the way to sort of think about it is that if we three are in a team, we're working something, we're talking together, we're working on a project, we're going to design for it to work together. The problem with open source Jenkins is that you also need these open source extensions. And if you have 75 of these extensions, then when you upgrade one, a lot of times you'll break something else. And so that basically creates this situation where people are actually afraid of upgrading their Jenkins server because they don't want to deal with all of the aftermath. And then the problem with that is now Jenkins becomes insecure because people aren't updating it. So that being said, the main business challenge with it is that it breaks down. Part of the reason why is because of all of these extensions. All right, okay. So let's wrap up everything with Atlassian. So I'm specifically going to talk about Jira right now, but we will talk about some of the rest of the Atlassian ecosystem. So Atlassian is something that's going to come up in a lot of our customer conversations too. And so about Jira, what Jira does is that it is pretty much the #1 solution for project management. So all of that stuff of creating issues, tickets, agile sprint loading and stuff like that, they're pretty much the leader. So how do you substantiate that? They have over 50% market share. And how they got here, the story behind this is that they were the original solution. So it was founded in 2002. And for the longest time, they just gobbled up more accounts, more accounts, more accounts, more accounts. And then they got to the point where they had 50% market share. That being said, it is a decent solution. I've used it before. They have lots and lots of different industry analysts that like their stuff. They are used by over 65,000 customers in about 1/3 of the world's countries. So they have a huge, huge, huge customer base. So just sort of talking a little bit about the tools and the Atlassian portfolio, Jira is specifically their project management solution. And what they're trying to do is they realized, hey, wait, we have a lot of customers. We need to go sell additional stuff as well. So why don't we create other stuff that we can package into these Atlassian deals, right? And so they basically moved into SCM. Their SCM solution is this thing called Bitbucket. They moved into the CI automation space with this thing called Bamboo. And then so what they're trying to do with all of this stuff is when they go for their Jira renewal, everyone's on Jira. They basically say, hey, what are you doing for SCM and CI? You're already renewing it with us. If you buy this additional stuff as well, we'll give you a discount, right? And so that's how they're trying to upsell their accounts. So that being said, they're doing extremely well, simply because so many enterprises are buying Atlassian right now. And just as a visual, here is where they are in terms of many of these like Gartner, Forrester reports. They almost always have Atlassian as a leader. And for project management, they're a number one, right? So 53%. So a little bit about the story of how we try to compete with Atlassian Jira. So at first, we come up with this single app vision. Let's consolidate all of your tools. How much money are you spending on SCM, your Jira, your Trello, all of this other stuff? If you just get GitLab, you save money and you're more efficient across the board, right? So that's one way in which we can pitch GitLab. But what we came to realize very quickly is the fact that many of our customers didn't want to move off of Jira. And the reason why is because if you're using Jira, it's such a centralized tool to your workflow that moving onto something else is really, really, really cumbersome. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of people just don't want to do it. And so our competitive motion moved from trying to compete with Jira to let's integrate with Jira. So now our messaging for the most part is, hey, you can stay on Jira and we have a first-class integration with Jira where if you go do, well, you'll actually get more value out of Jira if you use it with GitLab. And one of the things to sort of talk about real quick is the fact that Atlassian is discontinuing their on-prem solutions. And so what I basically mean by this is that I think that they have between 3 and 4 years to get off of some of these solutions, but Atlassian is only focusing on their SaaS solutions, meaning that if you have one of their on-prem tools, you basically need to figure out some other thing to adopt within like the next 3 years. So it's not immediate, but it is something that is happening. A lot of our sales team is having a lot of success prospecting new accounts. They find out that someone's using Atlassian and saying, hey, did you know that Atlassian is eliminating support for on-prem version of Jira? Love to talk with you about other options that exist to see if we can help, right? And so that's been something that has resonated with customers so far. All right, and the last thing is that we do have a pretty good amount of success around Bitbucket and Bamboo. And the reason why is because we're just better from a product perspective. And it's a tool consolidation play, right? So it's like, hey, you're using Jira, Bitbucket, and Bamboo. How much time do you spend integrating everything together, all this on, so on and so forth. And then you can talk about how GitLab is way better than many of these these tools like Bitbucket. All right, so just trying to wrap up everything. Our market position is that we're the challenger right now. And so this is a great situation to be in the fact that we are going into some of these more established markets and we are taking a lot of these accounts. So we're having a lot of success against Jenkins. We're having some success against Microsoft, having great success against things like Bitbucket with Atlassian. So that being said, our biggest fight is with Microsoft, and what the Salesforce data shows is that if we lead with product, that maximizes our chance of being successful. The fact that we can authentically go into every sales conversation and say that we have the most complete product right now, and that this is going to systematically make you more efficient across the board. And out of those big differentiators that we have, the biggest one that we have is security right now. So good luck in your competitive calls, and let me know how I can help.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Catch up.